Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Awareness Podcast. My name is Bill Free. I'm your host. And my guest today is Liz Cronkhite. Thank you for being here, Liz.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. And I'm going to give a little bio for Liz, even though as we get into our conversation, you'll learn that Liz is kind of not here anymore, and we'll talk more about that. But in the bodysuit called Liz, she's a spiritual teacher, a life coach, and a writer, most notably of the plain language for A Course in Miracles, the 4 Habits for Inner Peace. And I would also add, I would put this one as the most notable, a memoir of Christ. And I just finished reading it, and it's a very interesting read if you want to. It's a little bit scary. It's kind of like the Susan Segal's book, Trainwreck with Collision with the Infinity. Trainwreck with the Infinite.
There you go.
So anyway, Liz is, she enjoys working one-on-one with students of A Course in Miracles and other non-dualistic paths to help them access their inner peace. She emphasizes a direct relationship with spirit as the way to do this. And here's a little side note for Liz. In 2018, she experienced a moment she calls the break, when existence as she knew it fell away, sort of like Suzanne Segal's, and taking with it the life she had been living. Since that moment, she considers herself to be in an awakened dream, the spirit-centered life she led before, as well as this dramatic shift, are detailed in a memoir of Christ, a student of A Course in Miracles, Awakens. And I also will add to this, I have known Liz for nearly 15 years, if not to the month. And she was my first mentor, my first coach when I found A Course in Miracles in 2006. And she was very helpful for me to find adjustment, find connection with what the hell does this mean, and how to sort of connect with this brand new paradigm. So I've known Liz for a long time. And you can know her too. You can get on her mailing list at acimmentor.com. And I'm still on her newsletters since 2006. I still get, or 2007, I got on your newsletter mailing, and I still get all of them. And some of them are quite good, which caused me, I would say many of them are quite good. And some recent emails that are newsletter articles that you send out all the time caught my attention, which caused me to watch an interview with you and Regina Dawn Akers on Awakening Together, and then also notice that a couple of articles that you posted, they really spoke to me, and I wanted to talk about them. One of the articles is titled Post-Atonement, the Real World. And the reason several things caught my attention, Liz, was the first thing that caught my attention that caused me to want to know or hear more about your experience was the title of your book, A Memoir of Christ, and then the subtitle, A Student of A Course in Miracles, Awakens. And really loved the title. I loved the subtitle to that, because you don't hear very often a Course in Miracles student awakening or saying that they're awake. And That was really to me because I think a lot of Course in Miracles students do awaken and they just don't know it. And maybe they don't know what awakening is. So they're not willing or they don't think they should claim it. And then we get into all kinds of levels, et cetera, et cetera. But I think in my mind, Liz, in talking about the real world, and this article that you wrote, when was it? It was February 4th of 2022. The real world is very. It gives a real world description that I think is really clear that you had moved from the mindset of duality to the experience of non-duality. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I was saying that I felt that the inner and the inner and the outer and the higher and the lower were gone. That I didn't understand the timing. That was how I was describing it to myself, but I didn't really even know what that meant. And eventually I realized it meant that I have just one reality. That was gone, even though I was still experiencing the noise of ego. It was no longer wasn't my reality anymore. That's the best way I can put it. I felt I was in a new dimension.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think everyone has a different, maybe a different word for experiences that they're trying to describe that are maybe indescribable.
Right.
And in terms of what the Course says about this, it would say that there's a horizontal, seeming horizontal dimension and a vertical dimension. And we move into the vertical, we leave the dualistic framework, so to speak, and we experience, I feel that that's how we move from duality to the non-dual direct experience that the Course is pointing to. Yeah. And and I'm looking at your article here, it says in the article, the full awareness of the atonement then is the recognition that the separation never occurred. You cited a line in the text of the Course, and then you use a sentence from Workbook Lesson 159. The real world pictures heaven's innocence. Now, for me, I have the same experience that you describe in your language of it, just seeing through the experience of awareness. And that's a non-dual description for me, because awareness sees like a camera takes a photograph of an image. It's able to see everything that's in the image, but it doesn't put a label on anything. There's no good or bad. There's no commentary. It just sees and judges not. That's the same picture. And I think is that a description of what you would call no longer seeing only one reality? You're able to see the seeming illusory experience through the visual perception and judge it not.
I see appearances as appearances, right?
Yes. You see them and know their unreality.
Right.
Yeah. So I think we're speaking the same language on that. And when you're talking in your article that the ego consciousness, the focus in the ego consciousness, the focus is on the material world and one's experiences of it, obscuring like a heavy frame the opposite to truth, that is the true content of the ego. In spirit consciousness, and I would say for me, for awareness, the awareness of of experience, the awareness of the objects of experience. The focus is on its own content, the real world, and the personal experience falls into the background as the insubstantial framework in which the real world is experienced. And this reminds me of that workbook lesson 155. I will step back, Bill, the bodysuit, or Liz, the bodysuit, will step back and let him, or, and I like to take the pronouns out. I will step back and let it lead the way. Mm-hmm. It, the non-dual experience, the I am presence, or the awareness of love's presence, leads the way, and is our true essential nature experience.
I would say what shifted for me is that I no longer have that sense of stepping back. You know, back in ego consciousness, I stepped back and let it lead the way.
Yes.
And then what shifted when those boundaries were gone was that there was no longer a need to step back for something else to step forward. That was what fell away.
Yes.
So it's just more that it's there. I'm there. I don't know how you want to put it, but it's here. I would say it's here is the way I would put it. It's here.
Yes.
And any sense of me apart from that is quickly corrected.
Yes, I noticed that also in your article, that spirit consciousness. Let's see, when you at the very end of this article, you said that I no longer have two realities, ego and spirit, but only one. Spirit reflecting the oneness or the onlyness of God. This was the final expression of the atonement. Yeah. Correction was made, so it is over. The real world has come to take its place. And for me, I would take your words, you no longer have two realities, ego and spirit. You no longer have a dualistic location or fixed mindset. And that's refreshing. That's refreshing to me. It was refreshing when I read your article, because I see this occurring in dozens of students around the world. I see these awakening experiences coming in, and I think it's because this thing the Course calls the celestial speed up. I think this celestial speed up is coming into play in all the traditions, and consciousness is coming online in bodysuits that are no longer identified as the personal self identity. They're just, they're coming online with the Christ consciousness. And Liz, when I read your book and I read your articles and I go back and I read the Course, there's a lot of references, especially in your book, about the references to Christ consciousness and now identifying as the Christ.
Yeah, that was a shock.
Pardon me?
I said, yeah, that was a shock.
Well, I don't know if you remember this, but when we first met, I had this mental crazy experience where I ended up in a psych ward for about a week. And I was, you couldn't, if you'd have held a gun to my head and said to deny yourself, I would have said, shoot me, because I knew I was the Christ and I had no understanding. I had no words to describe why I felt or sensed or knew that clarity. And they put me in a white room and said, and then gave me these, some serious shots.
Meds. Oh yeah.
Yeah. they gave me they held me down and kept pumping me with this deadening stuff that made me lose contact with that unreality experience. So when I see this, that I am Christ, because that's what I would say to them in that psych ward. They would call me by my name, and I'd say, I am Christ. They'd come and give me another shot, But it's refreshing for me to hear or to see your clarity around this, and because I know what that statement means, that you are the Christ, you are Christ consciousness come into that's now realized seemingly as in a bodysuit, but it's an understanding that this is an illusory experience.
Right.
It's temporary. And I would, for course students, now I know that you wrote, now for you all that don't know Liz, she's probably written 10 or 12 books. Many of them are volumes of her articles that are profound. Her articles are just well written. She's quite a amazing and articulate writer. And she's written the Course in Miracles in Plain English, which I thought was crazy when you did it. I thought, who is she to rewrite the course? And then, of course, and then I took that on and started rewriting the course. I thought it'd be so much cleaner and so much easier to understand if we take the pronouns out, we take the dualistic or religious language out. If we do that, and I applaud you for being one of the first people that I knew that was willing to take on really more of a paraphrasing of the Course in Miracles. Was A Course in Miracles in Plain English, I think is the title, right?
In plain language, yeah.
Plain language, right? And I bought a copy of it, and it was interesting because I was just checking to see if I read it different, if it came in differently for me. And so I think it's okay for people to change the language so it fits something that you can identify with, right?
Yeah. And people aren't going to find it under the plain language of Course in Miracles. It's under the name of the two books. It's A Message of A Course in Miracles is the text. And then Practicing A Course in Miracles and The Way of A Course in Miracles are the workbook and manual for teacher, and they're in one book.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you were Googling it, or I don't know if you'd find it if you Googled it. If you went to Amazon, you wouldn't find it under the plain language. You have to find it under the names of the books. But yeah, right. I mean, I was frustrated trying to teach it. I had to spend so much time explaining why it was saying it the way it said it, rather than talking about what it was saying.
Yes.
And then one day it just came to me, why don't you try writing this down? And I was like, well, that's silly. And then I tried writing it down, and it was so simple. And I just went paragraph by paragraph, putting it into plain language, is to get away from the heavy symbolic language and with the male pronouns that turned off so many people. And
yes, me included. When I share the course, I started taking him out and putting her in. Now I'd switch it back to him for the next sentence, because I want to bring it into a non-gender window.
Yeah, and it's more than that. There are things like father and son, which really confuse people, because in the world, father and son are not the same. How can you say they're one?
Yes.
Unless there's some sort of really sick codependency going on there, So it's like it's whole and part. That's what it means, And it's just you have to kind of decipher. Yeah. Spend the time to decipher.
Yes.
And there's a value in that when you're studying it and you're dealing with this language.
Yes.
To study it with spirit and to gain clarity that way. But some people don't have the patience for that. They just don't have the kind of thinking for that. They're not analytical thinkers. And it was really for those people that just kind of wanted to get to the message without fussing with it.
there's so much dualistic language in it when it's talking about him, me, you, I, the Holy Spirit, Jesus, God. How many entities are here
Yeah, yeah.
in
You know,
oneness?
and again, it takes a long time to discern that it's telling you that these symbols that you already have are one thing,
Yeah,
you know, but it takes a long time to discern. How many different ways does it say true perception, for example? You know, it
yeah,
says forgiveness or Christ perception or you know, spirit's perception.
yeah,
And I just use true perception. I think I even
yeah.
use that for the real world, which is actually something
Well,
I kind of regret now. There's some things I would change, but I mean, basically it was saying the same thing over, telling you your symbols all mean the same thing. But
yeah,
again, it takes a lot of study to discern that.
yeah. Well, I took perception as almost like perception as the sleeping, or what the Bible would call the Son of Man. We're totally ignoring reality. We're completely asleep, have no interest in spiritual things. I would call that perception, that is in local awareness, that thinks that the world of form made me. So I would call that perception. And then moving up the ladder of awakening, as I call it, or the ladder of understanding, then you go to true perception, where you realize everything isn't what you thought it was. True perception is still the world of form, but you're seeing glimpses beyond the appearances. And I would call, so I think that would be a valid adjustment to take true perception and the real world a little bit. The true perception is a little below the real world, because the real world experience sees like the term, it sees like the Holy Spirit, it sees the unreality of this world and judges not. And at the same time, it's able to understand its reality, and allow everything to be exactly as it is without judgment.
Yeah, my experience of the real world is a completely different perception. Um, True perception for me is to see, as you said, you know, you see the unreality of what is appearing, and at the same time, you're seeing beyond it. You are seeing the truth beyond it. But yeah, the real world is a step further, where I am seeing a whole other world.
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah,
So, Liz,
yeah.
the idea that or the direct experience that I have found in this experience of awakening is that um, is that you're no longer a body mind that's having this experience, and yet when you look in the mirror, you sure see flesh looking back at you. So it's for me, the course's definition, I think it's in the manual for teachers, it talks about perception versus knowledge.
Right.
And in that description of perception versus knowledge, it gives the understanding that at first we're seeing through the eyes of the body mind, the personal self, and its conditioned belief systems and identification. And then as we move up the ladder of awakening, we move to true perception, and we move to it, and it's sort of like it's seemingly like a gradual seeing, where you see first as a noticer or an observer, and then you move to I don't know, true perception, and then when you identify no longer as a body mind, as a personal self egoic identity, you see completely differently, and I think that's because you come to the place of knowing the self, knowledge, and you're no longer identified as a bodysuit anymore. So you're living in the experience of knowing the beingness of the self. Does that make sense to you?
Right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, well, there's a line that kept coming to me the last few days, through a glass darkly. And I Googled it, and it's something that Paul, I think, said it in the Bible. And it was talking about how we don't discern perfectly. And that was really, it's been my experience, and I'm still experiencing a great deal, that I can see, yeah, like through a glass darkly, there's still this distortion occurring.
Yeah.
But there I can see what's beyond, and I'm aware of the distortion. Whereas before, I lived in the distortion, and occasionally had glimpses that there was something there, but those were very rare. And now it's like living, in the way I put it in my memoir was, I became aware of this. I was living in a different context, but I couldn't access it. And I couldn't quite reach it. My mind couldn't quite see it yet.
Yeah.
And it's been, just watching this whole other thought system wind down, which is really the best way to put it.
Yeah.
It's just been watching that move out of the way, in a sense. And as that has happened, the other seeing has emerged more and more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's been my experience as well. It's just a quiet, it's like you might even call it a transfiguration. It's like a quiet movement, or a quiet, it is like a different dimension as you describe it. It's like you, and you're not really so connected to the events of the world, even though sometimes you're called to respond to things that are happening. You're not so caught up in the events. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear to people, because sometimes we use certain words that sound limited. It's a lot like when we talk about people say about hearing spirit, and so they're expecting words. And there's a lot of different ways that comes through intuition and unformed thoughts and so forth.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with when I say seeing, and I say this is why I feel I'm in a different dimension. It's not I feel I'm in a different dimension. So I am seeing different. But what came to me, what was so startling with this experience was what began years ago with the first experience of it was I began to feel like I was a ghost in the world. I felt like, and I describe it like in those movies where somebody is dead but still walking around in the world, but and thinking they're acting in it. They're still
Yeah.
acting in it, and they really aren't. And that's what it started as.
Yeah.
And then it just went, eventually went into all these other experiences of sometimes feeling like this huge movement around me. I called it the hugeness. And that was just really my mind expanding in a way that was different from those moments where you feel the expansion of your mind, and you're seeing the boundaries fall away. It was almost a physical sensation
Yeah.
of movement around me, and it just went on to have, and I still occasionally have experiences of feeling in that new dimension, although I'm acclimating to it, so I have fewer of the experiences of that because I'm more there. But I
Yes.
know when I have that feeling, okay, something more is moving out of the way, because I must be feeling like this. It's almost like a limb coming, the circulation coming back into a limb, and it's not coming back all at once, but in parts of it. So the numbness is leaving certain parts of it, or in this case, the denial, or however you want to put it, of not seeing of truth.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I was thinking about this conversation we were going to have, and I was thinking about how does one awaken to the real world experience. And for me, I took on the non-dual teaching that's more of the Eastern tradition, Advaita, and the direct path. And I go back to the Course, and now I reread some of the Christian language and the pronouns, and I see that it's all there, but it's just kind of muddled in the wording and the language that was in Helen's mind that went in onto a book that thankfully happened. I mean, I'm grateful that the Course was given exactly as it was, because I was a Christian when I found the book, and I needed that undoing from that place where I was familiar.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed is that when I go back and like when I hear you talk about your awakening experience and your in reading your memoirs, which is unbelievable. When I was reading your memoirs, I was going, "Oh my God, that was just so." It would look like it was very very difficult to live in that experience that you found yourself in. And at the same time, you asked for it. You asked for this awakening, and you are getting it exactly as you have asked. And it came to you in experience in exactly the form that you needed so that you would have this awakening experience.
Right. Yeah, like I said, the difficulty was all due to the limitations of my own mind. Not, it's not difficult it's not difficult in itself. The truth is not difficult in itself. It's dawning on my mind was difficult for this mind because of the limitations of it. So all the difficulty was due to that, and that's what's being, has been and continues to be broken down. Is it's almost like I can almost see these structures that are being taken down. And it's just at the beginning, it was almost, I want to say almost violent, the breaking down that had to happen, and that, the breaking through. And it's gotten, of course, easier since, but it was extremely difficult for a long time. I trusted I knew what I was going through to a large extent. I mean, I had my doubts at times. I thought I might be losing my mind, but I trusted. I was, I was exactly in the truest sense, right? But but I trusted that I would come through it. I just didn't know how long it was going to last. And it lasted years, Although before it, I did have an inkling, because I often did when I was going to go through
before you had a what?
Before this happened, I had an inkling.
Okay.
An inkling of that I was about to embark on something that was going to be long. And I was like, no, that's not happening. Because, and I didn't want it. I didn't mind that I was going to go through something. I just didn't want it to last, years as it has done. And, now I'm on the other side. So I knew that too. I knew that when this is over, I'll look back and I won't care how long it took.
Yeah.
And those are the things that got me through. Trusting the process, and knowing that there wasn't, and it would get better, and that I would look back, and the difficulty, I'd remember it, but I wouldn't be able to, relive it. There wouldn't be any reason to. But I mean, I can't really remember how difficult it was, but I know it was extremely difficult.
Well, if you didn't have your journals, you wouldn't know all your journal notes. You wouldn't have the ability to recall probably most of what's in your memoir. Yeah. And I would say that, and this is another intuition that I had when I was reading your memoir, because I remember, I think you are so close to your own awakening that you can't see through the clouds that you're living in. And yet someone can give you a call and they can talk to you about their situation, and you go right to the nuts and bolts and the teaching of how to manage, how to not be drawn into the experience, but tools to, and also mantras. The course is filled with mantras and ideas that will help you to rest in God, to rest in your essential self. And those tools can be very helpful. Like in the early workbook lessons, I can choose peace instead of this. It's just a mantra that is allowing you to be available for your true nature to come in and help you.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that you had that skill set, but when I was reading your memoirs, I was saying to myself, she is too close to this experience. Yeah, it's very easy to see it, as a concept, or to see it as to be a mentor for someone. It's one thing to be a mentor for someone in their situation and give support and helpful ideas as it's based on the undoing of the ego thought system based from a course point of viewing. But it's a whole nother thing when you're in the middle of it. You just have to go through it.
Yeah.
For the experience to have the experience fully and not turn away from it. But just keep going through it.
The only way out is through.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. You just know that. You just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And
yeah.
I mean, there's otherwise, oh no, who wants to linger there?
That reminds me of a workbook lesson. That's another one that it describes what we just said. It's workbook lesson 333. It says, forgiveness ends the dream of conflict here. And I would also say, for me, awareness of love's presence, awareness ends the dream of conflict here. And we all have access to the awareness of what we are. Everyone is aware of their experience. And they can't have an experience if they're not aware of it. They can't talk about it. They can't remember it if they don't have an awareness of it. But it says in this paragraph on page 333, I know you're going to remember it immediately. No. Conflict must be resolved. It cannot be evaded, set aside, denied, disguised, seen somewhere else, called by another name, or hidden by deceit of any kind, if it would be escaped. And that's it. You have to look at it, face it, and there are tools in the course and in the non-dual teaching of Advaita where you see it, and as the course would say, and tremble not. You see it and you rest in God. You rest in peace. And there are workbook lessons like that workbook lesson, I think it's 106, that says, in quiet, I received God's word today, right? So that's just telling us to get quiet in this presence, get quiet in this stillness, get quiet in spirit, and we will receive. And that here's again where the language is a little bit. It's not so direct, but when you in quiet, I receive God's word today. In quiet, I receive the nature of I am. In quiet, I receive the nature of what God is, because I cannot be apart from that. And so there are tools in this teaching that are very helpful for us to awaken. And when I was thinking about your awakening and my awakening and the differences in the two, is that or the similarities and the differences are, they both sufficiently, and this is just my opinion, my understanding, they both sufficiently removed the obstacles, the blocks, the seeming blocks to the awareness of love's presence. There was enough obstacles removed so that the light could come in, and we could have eyes to see, seeing with spiritual vision or Christ vision. And I think that the way it happened for both of us was the progressive path of the undoing based on the teachings of A Course in Miracles. That's how it happened for me. But I needed the non-dual understanding so that I could know it directly as awareness.
And I have to say that for me, it was never about A Course in Miracles. I mean, that was just a tool that Spirit used to reach me. It wasn't. I'm not a great technician with the Course. I can't tell you where things are in the Course. I don't know everything it says. Despite having translated it, I don't know it that deeply well. In fact, most of the lines I can quote come from the zingers you can buy in that box, so you could pull up a card that had a line. Those are the lines I know from the Course. It was always about Spirit for me, and to me, it pointed me to Spirit, and that was kind of the end of it, really, to a large degree. And it was from then on, Spirit used that as a way to teach me. They used the Course as a way to teach me, but it was not about A Course in Miracles and knowing it chapter and verse, or even I'm not what I would call A Course in Miracles fundamentalist, because there will be people who will come to me and they'll say, but the Course says this, and I'm like, well, throw that out. I mean, there's a way to read. There's another way to read it than the way you're doing it,
Nice.
and it can be very hard, of course, because while it says it means to undo guilt, in many ways, much of the language reinforces guilt, unless you're reading it with Spirit and understanding the deeper meaning, getting behind it. And this is where, what you alluded to before with Helen's mind. I mean, we encounter Helen's mind when we read A Course in Miracles. It came through her mind.
Yeah.
You're always encountering the mind of the teacher when you read any spiritual teaching. That's the filter it comes into the world through. And some are really crisp and clear, and others are opaque like hers. And she was, she was in a learning process as she took it down. And I think that needs to be kept in mind when you have any spiritual teaching, is if it's in reinforcing guilt and fear, then you're reading it wrong.
Yeah. And that's where, Liz, I think a lot of Course students, including myself, got lost there. I used to be lost there. I would send you an email, I don't know, 5 or 7 years ago. I remember saying, this is really screwing with my mind. I don't understand this part on sex. And I would send you an email. You'd send me something back that was just, oh, of course. And it would totally straighten out my misreading of the context of the Course. And it's easy, and you can get lost there for a long time.
Yeah. And and that's why you just have to know, if you're not feeling that lifting of guilt and fear, if you're reading it and you're plunging further into that you're reading it wrong. And that if you can't get out of that yourself, then you ask somebody, you ask a teacher or somebody who can help you to say, I know there's got to be another way to read this. This isn't, this is reinforcing my fear.
Well, the mind that wants to awaken is the mind that thinks it's asleep, right? Yeah. So it's going to grasp at straws. It's going to grasp at all kinds of definitions and ideas. It's going to make up its own storyline as it's reading the text. So it's a bit of a paradox that the student who starts the awakening experience, it has to go away.
It never reaches it. That's the thing. Is it never awakens. It's not what awakening isn't actually like awakening. I mean, it's more the emerging of what's already there. So it isn't a path of attainment. It isn't a path of achievement. It's actually a path of something getting out of the way so that what is already here can shine through.
Yes. I think it's a path of understanding. And when I think of the word Christ, consciousness. When I read the word Christ in the course, I cross out Christ and I put understanding. Because understanding takes away the Christian Christ language, because that can come with a little bit of baggage. People think that because it's a name, it's another identity in a bodysuit that I'm given to myself. And unless you have clear understanding, like I know you do, that Christ consciousness is a metaphor for there is no world, that this body, that God is even too many words. So that understanding comes with the real understanding of Christ consciousness, is that there isn't any words,
right?
And there's no physical world at the level of absolute, and yet the physical world rises within the world, or the formless, formlessness of the absolute. The physical world arises in this, and this is how, in my mind, once you have this understanding of Christ consciousness, of, as the Course says, was Jesus the Son of God, or was he the Christ? Oh yes, along with you. And what he, and it talks about, he was a man that saw the face of Christ in all his brothers. And I would rephrase that. Jesus was awakening consciousness, who saw himself, or saw consciousness, saw the face of God, of pure presence in all experience, all objects of experience, and remembered itself as an awakenedness.
Right.
And of course, we put labels on it. We identified it as, and Jesus did it. Thank you, Jesus, you amazing man. But you're no different than this one called Bill, or that one called Liz. And he knows that. And we've given so much credence, so much specialness to that poor guy, Jesus, that he would never put up with what we've done for the pedestal that we put
I
him
think
on.
he laughs.
Yeah, I'm sure he's laughing like crazy, but it's not. And here we're calling it a he, and it's in the essence.
Well, Jesus was a he. Christ is not a he.
That's true. Christ is not a he, and the essence of what he was sharing with the world is what he was sharing, and from where he was sharing. The I am that I am is the same I am that we all share, even in bringing it to our attention. It's the same I am, the same I am. The trees and the minerals and the water are all arising out of the same essence of what God is. And moving out into the galaxies and the billions of galaxies out there, it's the same presence. It's the same I am that all of these galaxies and planets and solar systems are arising out of. That's pretty that's like, oh my God, right? That's the infiniteness of the self.
Right.
Yeah. And in your most recent article, February 11th, we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to cover this one a little bit. If anyone wants to contact Liz at acimmentor.com, and I don't know, how could they get past articles? Is that something that's available?
In all my books, I have 4 books. They're all called ACI Mentor articles. And the recent ones, the ones that I haven't collected into a book yet, are at what is it? acimmentor.blogspot.com.
Okay. Okay.
That so they're
Cool.
if you go there, it's where my blog is. So
Right. Well, we'll put for you all that are listening or watching, we'll be putting Liz's URL contact information in where it's the description is for you. And so as we look at this article for February 11th, the title is The Emerging Real World. And you wrote in the first paragraph, I wrote last week about the real world arriving in my conscious awareness as the realization of the atonement or correction of the perception of separation from God. Readers and clients ask if I am in the real world all the time. No, but if not every day, most days I experience it at some point. It is never far away. Can you talk more about that?
no.
No?
I don't know how to describe it.
uh,
I think I
well,
put in there, is that the one where I said one of the ways I describe, because people want to know what the real world is like, and I call it the universal smile. And sometimes when I
yes,
say that, people go, they've seen that, they
yeah,
know what I mean.
yes,
And
yeah,
I don't want to really well, what I'll say about that is that, yeah, it's not like I am staying there in a constant state. It is something that most days I touch at some point. And it's not even, it can be in meditation. It can also be not when I'm, I do formally meditate, but there's more continuity between my life and meditation than there used to be, I mean, so it's like, it's not like I'm not meditating when I'm not sitting there formally meditating, so,
right, yeah,
there's always a sense of connection. So, it will be something, it will come to me in some way. And again, I don't want to characterize what it is because I think it can come to different minds in different ways. And I don't want to say, hey, it's filled with this or it looks like that.
yeah,
You know it when you see it. It's not
yeah,
this world.
yeah,
And that's it's in fact it's almost like it's not really even seeing. It's
yeah.
an experiencing.
It's knowing. It's
Knowing.
the knowing, and I find that a lot of students that I speak to, if I ask them what is it that's aware of this experience right now, what is it that's aware of this experience? That's the real world right there. When you pause the mind and you look, what is aware of this experience? It can only be what what is ageless, genderless, timeless. And this same awareness is available, eyes closed, eyes open. And this awareness is the same awareness that the baby has at a month old or 3 years old. The adult has at 40 years old, 50, 60. It's the same awareness that is coming forth, that's seen, because it's an objectless presence. It's an objectless. It can't be objectified. It can only be seen and known. And that, to me, is, if you look at the real world, I think it's let's see, the real world. What is the real world? Is a symbol like the rest of what perception offers, yet it stands for what is opposite to what you made. Your world is seen through eyes of fear, and I would say eyes of duality, right and wrong, good or bad, labeling, commentaries, preferences, judgments, all of the things that get added to awareness. That's the world of duality. It's the world of the eyes of fear, and it brings the witnesses of terror to your mind. The real world cannot be perceived except through eyes forgiveness blesses, and I would say eyes of awareness, or eyes of presence, eyes of oneness. The Christ vision that is so talked about in A Course in Miracles is that spiritual vision that's given to us.
Right.
Yeah. So one more thing I wanted to mention is on about the fourth paragraph of this article on February 11th. There was a comment that you can't see that you can see. Oh, wait a minute. Let me go back
You
up.
can't see that you can see.
Yeah, you can't see that you can see. I knew I was in a new context and just couldn't see it. But there was more to it than that. I actually did see, but did not trust it. Now, this is a key thing that you're saying right here, because this is what happens when we see in glimpses. We have little glimpses of, and what the Course calls light episodes. Those are glimpses of understanding and clarity that they seem to come and then they're gone, and you don't know how that happened. And you actually see, but you didn't trust it. I was afraid it was some new kind of fantasizing because it included what was to unfold in the material world for me. This would have been my comfort if I had understood and trusted it. I knew ego was essentially gone, or duality, and described what seemed to continue as the echo of ego. And I would call that residual energy, or like the after image that remains on your retina after you have stared at something. I eventually learned from others that for many, if not most, ego, or the personal self-identity, does not just fall away and leave one to acclimate to a new experience of existence. It sort of winds down. Yeah. As it does so, spirit, and I would call it awareness, and seeing the real world emerges more and more. And a well-known teacher that I have interviewed and has been in our conferences, Stephen Bodian. He was a student. He was a Zen monk for 10 years, and he was a student of Jean Klein for 10 years. When I asked him about awakening, he said, well, it's kind of like this. First you wake up, and then you wake down. And it's just what you described. You sort of wind down. The undoing, and it is a much faster experience when you're seeing with Christ consciousness, because now instead of the mental masturation, or whatever you call it, instead of the mental thing, the ego that is trying to wake up, now the ego isn't engaged, and the light is just shining on all illusory experiences, and it's just putting light on. It's just a much faster experience. I would call that also a kind of a speed up, but not the same as a celestial speed up. Yeah.
Like an individual's speed up.
Yeah, but it is, because we have now stepped into the light that shines, steps forward, and it's now seeing with a big spotlight all the residual experiences, and there's nothing that it doesn't shine on.
Yeah, the light illuminates the darkness. Yeah, exactly. And that's the first thing that happens. And so, that's what you kind of slam into. And
well, congratulations on your emergence and your clarity now. And I want to thank you for being on the Awareness Podcast, Liz, and for sharing your experience with us and with me, and for being a friend for all these years. I have really regarded you as that you're my first Course in Miracles. I guess Ken Wapnick was my first one, but you were the first kind of a coach, mentor person that I came across until I found Regina Dawn Akers a few months after I found you. But you've been very helpful in my awakening experience, and thank you for being part of it today on this Awareness Podcast.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.